The next UNESCO site in England is in West Yorkshire, and it's called Studley Royal Park with Fountains Abbey, the ruins of Fountains Abbey, one of the abbeys that were destroyed after the Reformation and the dissolution of monasteries by King Henry VIII. But then the estate was given to one of the aristocratic families and was redeveloped, and in the 18th century it became the site of one of the beautiful English gardens. As you can see here, the top photograph shows you the English garden. We'll talk about some more gardens in a little while. This was one of the realizations of one of the most famous English garden designers called Capability Brown. His real name was Lancelot, but everybody called him Capability because he saw capabilities everywhere. So that's what we have, the old ruined abbey and the beautiful 18th century English garden, so a kind of naturalistic garden. Then we have a few places connected with the Industrial Revolution. So the first one is also the original place, the oldest place connected with the Industrial Revolution in England. It's in the county of Shropshire, and it's called Ironbridge Gorge, and here we have the famous Iron Bridge, the first of its kind built in the world. We also have some old factory buildings that are now all converted into museums. It's basically a kind of living museum, including a reconstructed Victorian town. So basically you can just go there. It's called Bliss Hill, and there are entire streets of reconstructed shops, some buildings like a local church, a school, also some industrial buildings as well. A lovely place to spend the day. Of course I've been there, yes. Well, it's a Victorian thing, I wouldn't miss it. I haven't seen two more two next places, but perhaps one day, why not? Another one is perhaps the first modern factory building in the world in Derbyshire. It's called Derwent Valley Mills. The mills, it doesn't need to signify the flour mill, the production of flour from grain. In the 18th century, the word mill came to mean factories, mostly textile factories. So this mill, Derwent Valley Mills, produced textiles, mostly cotton textiles. So that's the very first of its kind. It doesn't look very I would say unusual now, but when it was first built in the 18th century, this attracted a lot of attention, and it absolutely spurred on the industrial and economic development of Britain. Next one is one of those model villages or model towns. This one is in West Yorkshire, called Saltaire. We mentioned it already, so, but now it's kind of time to recapitulate all those UNESCO sites. So this is 19th century model village built by an industrialist, Titus Salt, for his workers. So again, it's like a self-sustaining village with everything, with some residential areas and common areas, a church, a school, a pub, but a temperance pub. Titus Salt was a teetotaler. He didn't drink alcohol, and he did not allow alcohol in his village. So you could go to a pub and drink some, I don't know, herbal cordials or something like that, but without alcohol. But the place is very interesting from what I've seen. Next one is in Cornwall, and it's Cornwall and West Devon mining landscape. Going back very, very far in history to the Celtic times, basically, when tin was discovered, tin and copper, but mostly tin was discovered in Cornwall, and it was mined. The places that were included in the UNESCO site are mostly from the late 18th and early 19th century, so the Industrial Revolution period, one of those places connected with the Industrial Revolution. There will be more in Wales, so we'll return to it in a little moment, but let's finish with England. Next place is the city or parts of the city of Liverpool, especially the place called Maritime Mercantile City. Of course, Liverpool, located in the county of Merseyside. And what we have here are the historical docks, so the trade docks that were used by all those trading ships. Unfortunately, also to trade in slaves, in African slaves. This was one of the cities that enriched itself on slave trade in the 18th and early 19th century, before it was finally outlawed in the 1830s. Later on, the shipping companies, later on I mean late 19th century, very early 20th century, constructed those wonderful headquarters, the first skyscrapers in Britain, definitely. One of the first skyscrapers in the world, comparable perhaps only to the earliest examples in America. They are on the waterfront, so-called, the place called Pier Head, and as you can see, these are the headquarters of the shipping companies, so the business companies that traded internationally in the 19th century and early 20th century. This is what they built. It really looks like parts of New York, old parts of New York. Very unusual for Britain, and at least some of these buildings have some aspects of Art Nouveau, which is very rare in Britain. So definitely Liverpool, and especially the Maritime Mercantile City, got UNESCO status. Next one is nature and culture combined, and this is the English Lake District. In the county of Cumbria, also called Cumbria sometimes, the Lake District with the natural beauty, including the lakes, the national parks, we mentioned them already, and the highest mountain in England, not Great Britain, because this would be Snowdon, but in England it is the mountain in Cumbria called Scafell Peak. Now, actually, it wouldn't be. Snowdon is in Wales. It would be Ben Nevis in Scotland, the highest mountain in the UK. Next one is also combined. It's basically the natural aspects of the landscape and the geology of the place in the county of Dorset and East Devon. So Dorset and East Devon coast, with parts called the Jurassic Coast. It's not coincidental. They have a lot of fossils, and basically the history of English geology is very much connected to those coasts, and geologists finding some fossilized creatures there. A very popular and picturesque place is called Dardle Door, and this is the natural stone arch, as you can see here on the top picture. In some places you still have the white cliffs, although there are more of them further to the east, but this is basically the southern coast. Another one, the newest one, they were just given the UNESCO status in 2019 in the county of Cheshire. which I visited, but I haven't seen this one. Jodrell Bank Observatory. Apparently, this is some sort of radar equipment, probably from early 20th century. Looks quite interesting and sci-fi. So that's the newest and also the youngest of the English UNESCO sites, which leaves us with Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and the overseas territories. So let's get going. Wales. The oldest monuments given UNESCO site in Wales are the castles and town walls of King Edward in the county of Gwynedd in Wales. King Edward, they mean King Edward I. So the four castles that were built on the orders of King Edward I after his conquest of Wales, of course in the Middle Ages, he was one of the Plantagenets. So the four castles of Beaumaris, Harlech, Conwy and Carnarvon. We talked about them a little bit when we talked about Wales, so I will not tell you again the story of the Prince of Wales and the investiture in Carnarvon and the unfinished castle in Beaumaris on the Isle of Anglesey, or the siege of Castle Harlech. You can read about that or you can watch a previous episode, but these are the castles. Plus some more city walls and castles in a slightly more ruinous state. There are lots of castles in Wales. Some of them built by the English king. Some of them built by the Welsh nobles who tried to oppose him. But here we have those wonderful medieval sites. Next, we have two sites connected with the Industrial Revolution, early Industrial Revolution, the 18th century. One is this spectacular aqueduct and canal built by one of the great 18th century engineers, Thomas Telford. And here we have the view from the bottom up of the canal, and also of the aqueduct, with the barge passing in a canal over the aqueduct. Incredible. This is not the only place like that, but definitely this is incredible engineering. Especially if you remember that they didn't have heavy equipment, so they only used kind of hand held materials like shovels and wheelbarrows and such tools. So this is an aqueduct, but absolutely not a Roman one. This is an 18th century aqueduct designed to enable people to carry the goods over the water. Next one is Blenavon Industrial Landscape, one of the early sites of the Industrial Revolution, mostly coal mining and metal works. So here we have the remains of one of the earliest metal foundries. You can also visit coal mine that was transformed into a museum, a kind of living museum. So there are still miners working there, and you can go for free, which is a nice thing, and visit the underground shafts and listen to all the stories about coal mining during the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. Children working the animals, mostly horses, working the very hard life, but it really makes for an interesting museum. Let's now move to Scotland. There are quite a few. There are 5 places in Scotland that have UNESCO status. The first one is the one you may remember when we talked about the Scottish islands and the Orkney archipelago, the heart of Neolithic Orkney. Places like Skara Brae Neolithic village, the oldest human-made monument in the British Isles, definitely. Also some more standing stones and tombs like the Maes Howe tomb. You can see the drawing of it with the cross section. So we talked about it a little. So hopefully you remember. Then we have the city of Edinburgh. So actually the UNESCO site states it's an old and new towns of Edinburgh. So the old town with the Royal Mile, with the castle and the old buildings, Holyrood House, and basically this kind of royal legacy of Scotland going back hundreds of years, plus the new town from the 18th century developed on the wave of the Industrial Revolution, and this kind of reinvigoration of Edinburgh as a city. So one city with basically two sides to it, both very, very interesting. Then we have another model village, which I also mentioned recently when we talked about Scotland, called Lanark, New Lanark, in the region of, in the area of Lanarkshire. So again, 19th century model village made by an industrialist to house his workers. Then we have late 19th century, wonderful, spectacular, and still very modern looking, the Forth Bridge, a little north of Edinburgh, very spectacular, and one of those great feats of engineering in Britain. The last one is an island in the Outer Hebrides called St Kilda, and this is an old UNESCO site which was given its status jointly for nature and culture. So we have a unique ecosystem and unique nature, plants and animals living on this small island, but we also have a local community, mostly of sheep farmers and fishermen. So this rural way of life unchanged for hundreds of years, with some old villages made from local materials, and basically people living the traditional way. So that's a combination. It's a little bit like the Lake District, with a lot of literary connections and beautiful nature. I guess similar. Never been there. Never been to the Scottish Islands. Again, something to look forward to. Then we have one site, a natural site in Northern Ireland, and it's of course Giant's Causeway and the Causeway Coast. So the coast near the Giant's Causeway. So this spectacular and very unique rock formation of naturally made basalt columns. So we talked about it already. It's one of the most spectacular sites in Northern Ireland, and it received the UNESCO status for natural beauty. Then we have 4 more places located in the overseas territories. We'll talk a bit more about the overseas territories, so the remains of the empire over which the sun never set, the greatest empire in the world, the British Empire, of course. So some places actually have UNESCO status, some for nature, some for culture. So the first one is in Gibraltar. It's called Gorham's Cave Complex. It's relatively new. when I visited Gibraltar, I didn't know of it, but apparently this is one of the last places in Europe with the remains of the bones and also the habitation of the Neanderthals. That is why you have the Neanderthal people here in the picture. Of course, the reconstruction from the bones and the caves as they are now. I don't know what they have there. They should have some sort of museum. Maybe you can visit the caves themselves. Anyway, this was one of the last places where the Neanderthal people lived before they went extinct. Very mysteriously, nobody knows what happened to them. Perhaps they were killed off by the modern man, or perhaps they died or they stopped breeding or whatever. Anyway, this is a UNESCO site in Gibraltar. Another one is in Bermuda Islands, the historic town of St. George. So here we have one of the colonial towns in the islands of Bermuda. So here you can see the port and a church, and basically the way that those colonial places developed. So mostly 18th century, I would say, and this is a cultural UNESCO site as well. Then two more very remote places that were given the UNESCO status for nature for its unique wildlife mostly. So the first one is Gough and Inaccessible Islands. The name says it all, Inaccessible Islands. So some small islands in the archipelago called Tristan da Cunha in South Atlantic Ocean. So much south, it's cold again. So you can see the kind of almost Antarctic wildlife, including some rare breeds of penguins. So I don't think this island is inhabited by people at all. This is just left for nature and given the UNESCO protection. And another one quite similar with very little human habitation, Pitcairn Islands in the Pacific Ocean, tropical islands, and especially one of the islands without any humans on it, called Henderson Island, is left to nature mostly because of the rare breeds of birds living there. So here we have all the UNESCO sites, and we'll return to some of those things like some royal places and the overseas territories in a different context, but here you have all the UNESCO sites together. And now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about another great passion of the British and a great category of interesting places to see, that is British Gardens.